Is the UFC slowly dying? UFC 306, which has been rebranded to Noche UFC Riyadh season, is struggling to sell tickets. I've made videos about this before, about how the tickets have gone from thousands of dollars to hundreds of dollars, and at their absolute lowest in this past few days, they got down to around $470 for like the worst seats in the house. They've gone back up. I assume that low price brought in some more sales to bump the prices back up, but the tickets are not selling for Noche UFC. And today we're going to take a look at, is the UFC slowly dying? Stick around to hear my thoughts. I'm Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. Before we get into the video, please make sure to like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. If you compare the 2016, 2017, 2018 UFC pay-per-view buy numbers to what is out there now in terms of pay-per-view stars that the UFC has on their roster, you've definitely seen a decline in that. During Conor McGregor's prime, he established himself as the best box office draw that the UFC has ever had in its existence. This is shown by Conor McGregor having the two biggest pay-per-view buys in combat sports history, with the most amount of buys ever being Conor versus Floyd Mayweather, and the biggest MMA fight ever, which was UFC 229, Conor versus Khabib. If you compare the height of the sport in entertainment, which in my opinion was UFC 229, that was, as far as entertainment goes, that was the highest that the sport ever got. Now, if you compare those pay-per-view stars, like we had Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal in some of their primes in those years, Conor McGregor, Israel Adesanya was on his way up, and you also had Khabib, who is also a draw as well. You would say that compared to now, the UFC has definitely declined a little bit in terms of their superstar drawing ability. Now, obviously, Alex Pereira is the face of the UFC now. Now, Conor McGregor is pretty much completely gone from the UFC. We'll see if he ever fights again. But in terms of active fighters, the two names that get pushed the most in terms of trying to push champions for pay-per-view sales is Alex Pereira and Sean O'Malley. And while Alex Pereira is a very big star in the sport, he's nowhere near Conor's level. And Sean O'Malley, I explained in a video last week that he does have a fan base, but they just don't spend money. They buy, or they stream fights, they don't buy them, and they don't have the money or income to go and spend thousands or hundreds of dollars on UFC tickets for any event like Sean O'Malley at the Sphere, because most of them are 15 to 22, and those people just don't have the money or disposable income to go and drop 80 bucks a month on pay-per-views, or at least maybe ever on pay-per-views, and then go to Vegas for the Sphere card and pay all those expenses. They just can't do it. And so in my opinion, the UFC is in a little bit of like a pay-per-view buys recession, and I think that's because the UFC is taking its place among mainstream sports, MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, boxing. It's just so widely accepted that it's not this shiny new toy for the sports market. And I think Conor was the perfect storm of MMA kind of on an upswing from the Ronda Rousey era, and then Conor comes in, and then also with it becoming more mainstream, which Conor played a huge part in. That's why we had the biggest moments ever back then, and we've seen pay-per-view buys, and honestly, the number of stars shrink over time. And partially, I think that is by design by the UFC, because Conor got so much power that he was able to basically nerf his own career because he made so much money. And I think that now the UFC doesn't want to give the power to people that are capable of kind of holding the UFC hostage the way Conor has done. He's held the UFC hostage with their biggest star, which is himself, time and time again. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't get his worth or fight for what he needs to get paid, but Conor is the biggest name that the UFC will ever have, and that's because the UFC is not going to allow cross promotion with boxing for somebody like Sean O'Malley or Alex Pereira. In my opinion, I think they learned their lesson with Conor. Now back to the original point of this video is the UFC / MMA slowly dying? Pay-per-view sales are dying, and I think that's because we're moving closer and closer just to a more and more streaming based market where you pay a monthly fee and you get access to whatever. The sport itself, is it shrinking? Is it dying? No. I think entertainment value wise, UFC 229 was the peak of MMA, peak of UFC. But in terms of the sport itself, It's growing worldwide all the time. New regions are having superstars emerge from them all the time. Africa most recently with Francis Ngannou, Israel Adesanya, Kamaru Usman, and then New Zealand with Israel Adesanya, New Zealand, Australia. And it just bounces around with every few years. A new region ends up having a superstar that makes the sport grow even more. And with it still being a relatively young sport, I think that the UFC is definitely going to keep growing, and so is MMA, even though it's going to be more corporate and uniform. We're not going to see any more Conor McGregors, in my opinion, and we aren't going to see people getting Conor McGregor paydays either. So short answer is pay-per-view buys are dying, but MMA is still growing. It has not peaked yet, and it could still get bigger. Maybe at some point, the December pay-per-view in Vegas or International Fight Week or something like that in July or August ends up being looked at like the Super Bowl. We're like, oh, the UFC fights this weekend, it's so-and-so and so-and-so, Bo Nickel, Hamzat Chimaev in like 3 or 4 years. It could get to that point. So short answer is no, UFC and MMA are still growing, even though pay-per-view sales are dying. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. It really helps me out a lot. If you're interested in supporting the channel further, then become a channel member today for access to members only live streams, vlogs, and some other members perks. So click the link in the description down below or the join button on our channel homepage to become a member today. If you're interested in some non-MMA content from me, go check out my personal channel, Wyatt's World, and go check out my weekly comedy podcast, What's Up Bro, with Wyatt and Bo. Both of those are linked in the description down below. Go watch this suggested video, and we'll see you next time.